Hello and welcome to In Conclusion, your week in review. I'm Kejan Haynes. We have a great show tonight, so let's get started. We started the week off on another stain on our healthcare system. 24-year-old Keisha Ayers died days after giving birth via C-section at the Women's Hospital in Mount Hope. Marie Hull from CNews spoke to the grieving husband and father.
On Friday, Keisha was taken to the Areem Health facility where she died shortly after. Juma said something needs to be done to change the negative reputation of the Mount Hope Hospital and calls for an investigation to be done.
I know they have launched an investigation, but again, it's doctors investigating doctors, so I think we're going to already know the outcome. And there's a feeling of helplessness when you cover stories like these because you can't vote doctors out the way you can politicians. But we can vow to make healthcare reform a major talking point in this year's elections. And to the healthcare woes, they continued. Nurses on the maternity ward of the Port of Spain General Hospital started what seemed like a protest epidemic this week. For 2 days, they walked off the job after alleging that they were being attacked by new mothers or pregnant mothers on the ward. Now, when the health minister was first informed of this, he kind of brushed it off as unions warring unions. And then he said that there was something else that had to be causing the patients to revolt, essentially blaming it on the nurses. And if you followed this story on social media, there were quite a few people who felt that the nurses were simply receiving a taste of their own medicine. And the week of protest continues because swim call workers held up traffic on Monday, but that was only because of nosy passers-by trying to stop to see what they were doing. They were calling for better wages and better working conditions, usual stuff. And while the media covered the story, it really wasn't front page news or top story until... All right, and why the protesters deny that they started the fire, someone definitely did. That's at least what SwimCall CEO Sharma Lala says, because it was definitely arson. And that's what's become the annual beat them burn, if you will. So we in the media took part in our own tradition, being forced to ask the same question every time this happens.
A burning question posed to the line minister for the Bitham landfill resulted in the government's latest position on outstanding calls for the relocation of that landfill as fires raged there over the past 2 days.
There are no plans at this point in time to relocate the dump, but government has to consider the implications of this kind of situation.
And keep in mind, this comes after the ODPM CEO spoke with Faziran on Morning Edition, speaking about the numerous proposals and studies that are actually being done right now to have the dump moved. Anyway, moving on. Transport Minister Stephen Cadiz launched a slew of new regulations for drivers. New drivers can't drive between midnight and 5 a.m. No newly licensed driver should have alcohol in their system. No one driving a public vehicle should have alcohol in theirs. And I swear I was the only person in the country who didn't know that it was actually already not a law to be able to not drink with alcohol in your hand. But, oh well. It'll also be an offense to park in a handicapped spot. That'll be great for my dad, who complains about that all the time. And everyone in the car, backseat as well, now has to wear a seatbelt. To which the rest of the world must have said, duh. Welcome to the 21st century Trinidad and Tobago. All right, and into politics. The UNC's Monday Night Forum is back after a 3-week hiatus. Now, you definitely miss these things because it creates great fodder for the entire week. And of course, this week they didn't disappoint. So amidst discussion of questionable distribution of lands in Chagaramas, the Prime Minister stuck in a promise of a causeway to the peninsula, which then angered the PNM, and they started a tug-of-war of sorts over whose idea it was. Not that it actually matters.
It is not in the idea, it is in the implementation of ideas. And therefore, this causeway, I remember way back when John Humphrey, I think it was in government, there were discussions about that causeway. Everything has its time in coming. The thing is, when I spoke of it, I know that I can make it happen in the same way the Point Fortin Highway is happening here.
And meanwhile, you have a traffic expert who the government hired to deal with it, saying that you don't actually need a causeway.
Certainly a causeway is not sustainable transportation. A causeway is meant to drive more. We cannot deal with the issues of congestion if we continue to provide space to drive more.
The causeway is not even mentioned in the master plan, which is now posted on the CDA's website for public review and comment. The government's announcement of its intention to construct a highway on the water is therefore at odds with the CDA's own stated vision.
All right, we have a lot more happen this week, but we have a lot to talk about after the break. So let's take a look at your 8 o'clock news headline. Remember, it's just satire. Welcome back. Trinidadians have an opinion on just about everything, and if it's one thing they're very vocal about, it's the issues in the lesbian, gay, bisexual, and trans community, the LGBT community. But unlike the Prime Minister, we in the media don't need to wait until it's politically expedient to discuss issues pertaining to any members of our society. So tonight, we're definitely going to talk about the media's coverage of the LGBT community. Now, how we should be covering this and how we should cover this. So I brought Colin Robinson from CAISO, that's Trinidad and Tobago's coalition advocating for inclusion of sexual orientation. Timmia Hearn from advocacy group I Am One. Freelance journalist Paula Lindo from Trinidad Guardian, Rachael Espinet. So good evening to all of you. I want to start with you, Timmia, because we were talking last night and you said that, you know, why are we having this discussion about how the media should be treating it when there aren't even laws covering the treatment of the LGBT community? So I want to get your thoughts on that. Do you think that one should come before the other?
Well, it just surprised me to hear that we are going to be covering in mainstream media our treatment on the screen and in the news, etc. Because, you know, it's one thing to say, well, I would really like it if the way that the media treated, say, trans persons was this, and this is the way we use gender pronouns, and this is the way we talk about us, and this is the way you refer to my partner, etc., etc. But that's all very nice and fancy and nice and pretty, but when you come back to it, how is the news supposed to cover something in an inclusive, equal, and fair manner when the laws don't? And but that's a bit of a confusion to me in how to deal with it. Colin, jump in.
I mean, I think that the media helps change the law.
Right.
I agree.
That happened in the U.S. That a lot of people are saying that all these new laws coming toward same-sex marriage started because there was a push in the media.
And I think that's one of the opportunities that we have in Trinidad and Tobago. I mean, I've been doing this work in the media for the last 7 years, and I've seen lots of openings that we still haven't got it totally right, but there are lots of openings. I think media has been largely responsible. I mean, there's some egregious examples of the opposite.
Right.
But the media is actually helping rationalize the debate. It's helping humanize us.
Right.
It's not helping humanize trans people enough. We still have a little bit too much sensationalism in the coverage.
But
that's the media as a whole.
That's the global population. Well, I mean, I was excited about it. You know, when I heard about, I was excited that this conversation was happening. I was just surprised. So maybe that's my ignorance. I don't know. Maybe the media is more progressive than I thought.
Well, let's hope so. Well, let's bring that to our two. So we have Rachael, and we have Paula. Rachael, I know you're an advocate. So how do you think we've been covering this, and is it enough?
Okay, well, I wouldn't call myself as an advocate as much as an ally.
All right.
But I think that there are some people who are covering it very well and others who lack the sensitivity and the understanding to be able to cover it adequately.
Can we name names?
No, I will not. I will not.
Because
I will
was
later.
reading on Facebook where a colleague was saying that when certain people come to their media house to be interviewed, they don't say it to their face, but there's a lot of talk of he, she, and it. And, you know, even though it might not come out in the coverage, we also need to change the mindset of the people.
Within the newsroom.
Within the newsroom setting.
The Barbados Nation did something wonderful on that. A very prominent transgender person in Barbados, who's well known as an advocate, was being reported on, and there was a debate about pronouns to use, and they editorialized on it. And they said, we're using the pronoun the person wants.
Well, that's something I want to talk about. So in a case of course, you have Joel, who's going up for the Candace Sanford and West. And I think it's the first time we've had a politician come out and be we have trans politician. So how do we start?
Still don't have any out gay or lesbian ones.
No.
Well, openly.
That's
anyway.
said out.
And
Yeah.
how do we refer to a trans person in general? What are some of the terms, transgendered person? What are some of the terms that we should be using?
Well, I think actually the media coverage of Joelle has been overall, as far as using her pronoun properly, pretty respectful. I mean, she's very, and perhaps that is because she looks every bit a woman. She's a very attractive woman, and I think that's something the media is comfortable with, is a very female presenting person, and there's no way to look at Joelle and go he.
Though people do.
People do. But I think that the media overall, from what I've seen, a lot of the news editorials and the coverage.
But the coverage of her award was horrible.
That was true. The coverage of her award was, and even the fact that one of the things that the news continually does in Joelle's particular case, but this is a universal problem, really, is they say, when she was a man.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
Whoa!
So this is something that we should be, yes, this is an important part of her past, but it's not
relevant.
everything. It's not
Is it relevant to what you're covering?
Not only is it not relevant, to assume that she was always a man is also wrong.
Yeah.
She was assigned male at birth, which is the accurate term to use. But to say that she identified as a man before she became a woman is very incorrect.
Or even to use the word became.
Yeah.
What
Yeah.
makes
That's true.
What makes somebody a woman? And I think that's actually part of the debate that would be productive to have, where that I have a lot in circles of people doing advocacy work and trying to figure out how to self-identify. We talk a lot about that question, does your gender identity the world perceives, does that have to do with how you are seen? I mean, what makes you a good woman? If Joelle says she was always a woman, that's pretty much good enough for me.
Yeah. And to answer your question, Kejan, you use the pronoun they want you to use.
Yes, right.
Right? If you're not sure, say they.
Ask. No.
Or ask. Ask
you're not
first,
sure, ask
but if you can't, you can always use they.
Or refer to them by their name.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So is there any sort of area for media training or sensitivity training that's being put out right now?
I mean, are there opportunities for media to get training on these issues? I think many of us right here would be happy to organize a media training. I've participated in 2 that have happened in Trinidad and Tobago. I mean, they've happened generally in the framework of HIV, but they've paid attention to the various groups that are badly reported on in relationship to HIV. The Caribbean Vulnerable Communities Coalition did a training that was quite interesting that Cedric Martin and Dale Enoch helped design. And then a handful of media practitioners did come through over the course of the 2 days.
All right, hold that thought. We're going to take a quick break and be right back. This is In Conclusion. All right, welcome back. We're talking LGBT and the media. So the reason why I brought up this topic is because you listen to the radio and the homophobia is so rampant. It's the simplest thing from Jaden Smith wearing a dress and it's, nah, my son could never wear that. And how do we balance this sort of homophobia, which is, free speech, everyone's well within their rights, but then you also need to have compassion for your fellow man, and in the media we try to treat everybody equally. So how do we balance that? Rachael, I know you have some thoughts.
Well, I would say the best way to that is education, sensitization, and having the information available. I think the more you read about it, the more that you understand what the people who are LGBTIQ are like, you will not hate them as much. One of the things that I always find astounding is people saying, well, there are no gay people in Trinidad. And it's like you could be standing next to a gay person and the two of us look over and like, really? So it's education and people being aware that these people are people.
And is it just all shock value, anything to get listeners, anything to get callers onto their programs?
Well, that's what it feels like to me. I mean, the radio is just playing off bacchanal culture. So I think that for some reason, a lot of radio hosts have got the idea in their heads that being super homophobic is gonna make more drama. But, you know, as we were talking about earlier, it's not like you can treat any other group of people in the country that way.
Right.
You know, even if you know, if you go, let's stick with the gender side of it. When you have a bunch of men bashing women on, that happens on radio,
right.
but it only happens to a certain level. How far do you go before you start calling somebody a certain number of words that then become unacceptable?
It's about media responsibility.
Exactly.
It's about what the management of the radio stations wants to allow. I mean, that phenomenon is not specific to Trinidad and Tobago. Talk radio is incendiary in lots of other places, and people push the limits. But it's also true that even here, we have places on radio where that doesn't happen. We have really rational debates that happen in small pockets on some radio stations.
Yeah.
And so how do we also get one? Sorry, go ahead.
And I was thinking, to come back to what Rachael said, a lot of it, when I first started advocacy, when I became a journalist and was going to LGBT groups to teach them how to talk to the media, I told them that a good thing to do is to let people see LGBT people as people and not as something less, which is a lot of what all the homophobia is about. They're not me, they're other, and they're not other that's similar to me, they're something lower than me. And the thing is to keep telling stories about regular people so that people will see that these people are also us.
So I guess that don't be afraid in that sense to tell these stories, even if you know you may anger a few people, you know, forget them. Go ahead.
But also telling the stories in ways that are sensitive to the particular climate that we have. I mean, rest his soul, Marcia Henville thought it was appropriate to go film the young people, the young trans people who were homeless and squatting in House of Wax. You see them ducking and running from the cameras. So there are ways to humanize LGBTI people, and I add the I in because there are intersex people in the country as well. And there's no media coverage, not necessarily that there should be a lot of it, but one thing we need to understand is not everybody's born male or female. That's just a reality. People at Mount Hope know that. So, yeah, we need to make sure that people get sensitive representations in the media, but we also need to make sure that we're not doing them damage in the process.
And so if you have cases where people are taking out ads, you know, condemning homosexuality, should the media be printing these ads? Is it, again, free speech, anything for money? How... I'm going to toss this out for everybody, and it's a sensitive topic, but it has to be discussed.
I think the media has a responsibility to not print hateful ads. Like, that's my opinion.
Or ads that simply say things that are absolutely untrue.
As well.
About certain groups of people.
I mean, that doesn't just happen as attacks on the LGBTQI community. That happens. There are other ads that have been published that are just... there was some around Wayne Kublau Singh's time that I was like, you actually published this? And that's my problem. Is sometimes I feel like the media, specifically newspaper and even more radio, becomes a tabloid. This is a national newspaper, and yet you're printing this very sensationalized, inaccurate ad just for money. I think that's irresponsible, and I think that you could fill those spots with something that's slightly more accurate, at least, even if it's opinionated.
Advertising that does harm to particular groups of people should not, media houses shouldn't profit from it.
Right. So it's profiting from hate speech in a sense.
Yeah.
And if we're talking coverage...
But it's not just profiting from hate speech, it's also profiting from, when you read something in a newspaper, you tend to believe it's true. Just if you're uneducated.
And especially if the ads are framed in a sort of article, like an actual article.
And,
and the paid advertisement is a little thing on the bottom.
Right, and if you're saying things about HIV, if you're saying things about abuse, if you're saying things about homosexuality, all of which are untrue, factually, if you look at the evidence, if you look at the scientific background, if you look at studies, we just say, well, that's just, not even it's not true, it just is so far from the truth. It's pretty absurd. You're printing that in the newspaper. That's irresponsible. You're miseducating people, and you're getting people to believe things about a population in your society that are just blatantly wrong and creating a fear epidemic. You know, that's just totally irresponsible.
So I'm going to toss this one out to the journalists. So what do we do now? What is the next step? What do we start doing? Maybe not just to change the public's mind, but to change our colleagues' minds about how we cover these issues.
Rock, paper,
So,
Exactly. It's such a dangerous. I mean,
I wouldn't say it's dangerous, but it's a difficult question.
Difficult,
That's
yes,
a harder
it is.
question.
I think, yeah.
Yeah.
So, well, training is the first thing.
That's what we should be demanding. We should be demanding
we should be asking for people to, and we should make it so that everybody can come to the training. Because I've been to several training exercises where journalists can't come because they're working.
Well, of course.
And they never do another repeat, so that the ones who were working,
They miss out.
they
But there's online tools for us to check out the video.
The Pointer School for Journalism has several good training courses that are free and take like an hour or two, so you could find time to think. Some media houses have been known to pay for their journalists to take not free media courses. But also, I think, in coming back to your point about the radio, we need to, a lot of radio personalities aren't trained as journalists, so they have no clue about ethics and laws and these things. They just
go
talk.
The journalism rules and schooling that we go through.
So I think there needs to be training specific to these DJs and personalities, and the media houses need to take responsibility and make sure that they go. Yeah. Say that if I'm employing you to talk to people, to bring in people, you need to go to this.
Right.
But I kind of hate to be the one to contradict a good idea, because there's a lot of problems with the training sessions. One is gender issues and homophobia are so deeply rooted in people that it's very hard to get it to budge on a weekend. At
2 hours.
Yeah, at 2 hours. And then also everybody's busy to show up to do that. It's very difficult. I think a better way for we as media practitioners to help this problem is to stop being so silent when our co-workers say things like he, she.
True.
To object when we say something that, then somebody says something that is so homophobic. You know, actually speak out and say,
this is wrong.
All right, Rachel, this great conversation. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. I mean, this is not something that we could talk about in 20 minutes, as you know, this show only allows. But we'll definitely have to do this again at some point. I know this is going to spark a lot of conversation. So if you have thoughts on this, hit us up on social media. Use the hashtag in conclusion. Let's take a break. We'll be right back. All right, thanks for joining us. That's it for this week's In Conclusion. Great discussion by the panelists. Remember, it always continues online using the hashtag In Conclusion. Next week is World Press Freedom Day, so we're going to have a lot to talk about there as well. You should go to Matt's homepage, the Media Association of Trinidad and Tobago, to see 30 to 60-second recordings of journalists from throughout the country talking about what press freedom means to them. Until next week, I'm Kejan Haynes. A brand new week of news begins right now.